Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Odyssey as well. As always, credit to Justin Campbell or at JCamp1521. There's a lot of work for podcasters, so intros, editing, stuff like that. So if you need someone like that, he's your guy. Today, my guest is Sal the Agorist. We're continuing our live reading series of New Libertarian Manifesto. This will be part 5. Probably knock it out. Probably the main book today. Oh, almost certainly will. I'm not even maybe. It's not that much left. And then probably next episode we're probably gonna start on the critiques. I'll probably figure out a way to title them so they look differently. Since we'll basically be done with the book of this part, but then we'll be just going into other major thinkers of the time who had their own given critiques on it and kind of what they had to say. Just so you guys know, I remind you guys this every single time. The template of the show is how this usually works. If you're watching it right now, today's the 24th. If you're watching at 9:20-ish p.m. Eastern time, you're watching the live stream version. If not, this will be released roughly about a week later. If you want to have access to it in the meantime, and to be able to like catch it between the public live stream and when I release it publicly as a numbered episode, you'll have to be a patron at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. The lowest level is $2. The highest level is 20. There's differing benefits at each level. The highest level being the 20 is the sponsor level, and I read them off every episode. My sponsors are CD McRae of the Whiskey and Tea podcast. I have Jacob Wintergrad of the Daniel 3 podcast, covers a lot of biblical anarchy type stuff. Brandon Smith, his Twitter is @_2D System. He's on YouTube and Rumble and Spotify and other streaming platforms as 2D System. He does a lot of music type stuff. Like I said, patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. To just a reminder, we're doing the live reading series of New Libertarian Manifesto right now. I've already completely knocked out an Agorist primer. I remind you guys this just about every episode with Caleb Brown. That was another one of Conkin's work. The notable thing about that live reading series is Caleb's a paleo, so it was kind of interesting seeing Agorist and a paleo talk about agorism. I also just knocked out. I did 2 episodes, both titled Debate Prep, 2 separate episodes with Kinsella, Stephan Kinsella, and David Friedman. And we were kind of talking about deontology, talking about consequentialism, just basically like roughly just ethical theories is what they're called. And just kind of seeing where they're coming from, because I was kind of trying to set up a debate between the two of them, and we're still going to see if I can. It's very nuanced when you're talking about people's their how they go about living their life, they construct their theories. It gets very meta and very nuanced and very weird. So I found it constructive to talk to both of them about their positions. That way, maybe we can set up some sort of debate or discussion or something along those lines. Because there was some people who wanted to see a consequentialism versus deontology debate, and even then, that's hard to do because neither one of them are technically either one of those, but they're like something close or different. So it's trying to find the spot where they can have a disagreement. And I don't know. I'll get back to you guys on that if we end up having a debate, discussion, whatever. And yeah, as always, I have the Tower Gang Show. We just recorded a fun one yesterday with Chase Geyser. Guys, always go check out TopLobsta, TopLobsta.com. Use Jose at checkout for 10% off. With that, let's get Sal in here. Hey, what's up, man?
What's up, brother? How are you?
Doing all right. Yeah, you should totally check out those. I think the only public one right now is the Kinsella one. I'd like to hear your feedback, and the Friedman one will come out in a couple days. But
I saw a little bit of I saw a little bit of that with you and Kinsella. It was good. Yeah. He's a really interesting dude. He's got so many controversial opinions. Like no matter where you are in the libertarian movement, you have problems with some of the things that he says.
But, yeah, and he's very vocal about it. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
What I don't get upset about. A lot of people get upset about his takes. Like I don't know if you have a bad take. Like yeah, maybe I'll make fun of you, but most of the time, like especially somebody like a Kinsella, it's like why? What's the point? What do I want to do? Do I want to go to a giant thread arguing about something?
You're not going to convince that guy. Yeah. He's made up his mind by now.
Yeah, and I don't. And usually, even when he does have a take I disagree with, it's coming from a place of like he's ready to argue it. So you're like, okay.
he is, as he says, a heavyweight.
Yeah. Well, so anything new with you? It's been a week or two since we've done one of these. Anything going on with you in your life?
No, not really. I remember what I was going to tell you before we went on, which was, I don't know if you're sharing this on Facebook or something like that, but if I didn't see a link. If I did, I would have shared it to my page, but that's all right. That's what I was trying to remember before, though.
Oh, you were trying to. What were you trying to say?
Your intro.
What were you trying to say? You cut out for a small second. You were just wanting.
No, like before we went on, remember I couldn't remember what I was going to say, and I was going to ask you if you shared it on Facebook so I could post it to my page, but I didn't see anything. So
no, I was just being lazy. I just dropped it on Twitter real quick.
Gotcha.
I mean, not a big deal. These type episodes don't do so great in the live stream aspect, but then they usually do decent later, and people will catch them later, which makes sense. The structure of these type of things, it would make sense. It's not really a hot item for a live stream, but usually gets a little bit more numbers later. I guess what were you would say?
Well, I was saying we could find something controversial to talk about afterwards to drive up the live stream numbers because it's a short chapter. So
yeah. Junkie Jeff says people still use Facebook. Yeah, that's my problem. I barely use Facebook anymore. So
true.
Yeah.
Follow my meme page, guys. I'm over on.
You guys
I've got like 15,000 followers on my one meme page. People on Twitter and Facebook, they don't like commingle. So like go to Print Guns Not Money on Facebook and follow my page there. If you're following me on Twitter, follow me there. It's more geared towards like guns. It's like like an issue specific page, but it's got a decent following. So
yeah, I mean, there's definitely uses for Facebook. I just got so frustrated with Facebook. It used to be a lot of fun, and it's a great platform for like autists who do like to have our type of arguments because it's really suited for that. But then after a while, just with all the censoring, it just got just too annoying. I
feel like it's like Fedbook. I feel like the feds are just all over Facebook.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's good for memes. I'll give it that. Every now and then, I'll pop over to Facebook and then kind of look through my feed and try to find a meme to steal and then go drop it on Twitter. And that's about all. That's really all I use it for, other than promos for my show.
Yeah, true. Same.
Yeah, because that's where all the good memes are. Usually, it's Facebook. And I don't know, Twitter, not so much. But I don't know. Whatever. Well, I guess, let's go ahead and get into it. The spot we left off on, we were halfway through where he was kind of describing the different phases of, how agorist society comes about kind of deal. We already covered phase 0, phase 1, and now we're about to get into phase 2.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 63, although I don't know which one you're using. So
same. I got the same.
Okay, because I have the one that doesn't have agorist class theory in it. So, although I do have that book as well. So.
Same.
So I don't know if that affects the numbers, but okay. Cool. So then it should be 63, phase 2, mid-density, small condensation agorist society. At this point, the statists take notice of agorism. While before, libertarians could be manipulated by one ruling faction to the detriment of another, sort of anti-market competition, played with ballots and bullets rather than innovation and pricing, they will start to be perceived as a threat. Pogroms, mass arrests may even occur, although that is unlikely. Remember, most agorists are embedded in the rest of society, and associating with them are partially converted libertarians and counter-economists. In order to reach this phase, entire society has been contaminated by agorism to a degree. Thus, it is now possible the first ghettos or districts of agorists to appear and count on the sympathy or of the rest of society to restrain the state from a mass attack. I don't know if you have anything to add there. We've knocked that first paragraph. It's very much sounding a little bit reminiscent of today. But the weird thing about these phases is little bits of each phase seems applicable today. So, I mean, I know you've talked before about where you kind of think you are. I feel like you said phase 3 is kind of more where we're at, or somewhere between the two.
Yeah, I do. I think we're at phase 3 right now, and we'll get into that. But when he talks about the first ghettos and districts, you can almost think of the Miami crypto community or the Agorist or voluntaries community in New Hampshire. Those would be good examples of sort of the budding hotspots of agorism that Conkin's talking about here, I think. And they're not fully developed yet, don't get me wrong, but they're sort of we're getting there for sure.
Fledgling, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. These communities, whether above or underground, can now sustain the new Libertarian Alliance. NLA acts as spokesman for the Agora within the statist society, using every chance to publicize the superiority of agorist living to statists inhabiting and perhaps argue for tolerance of those with different ways. The weird way, I mean, it's weird how he phrases that, because I mean, maybe I'm just like not being creative enough, because like I guess I have a hard time applying that to modern day, because he's using explicit terms of like agorist or this or that. Maybe I guess you could almost swap out terms. Like you hear the word decentralized a lot, so you hear people making arguments for like say like crypto and stuff. So maybe they're not explicitly, and I guess maybe Conk is not even saying that this was explicitly how it'll go down. He's just kind of giving a loose idea. Then also, like, this is why I don't like when he uses terms like NLA, when he like over describes it, because then it makes it harder to get imaginative and think in different ways of like, well, what could that mean in real life, you know? But
right,
I don't know.
right.
Maybe that's just me.
It's important to remember though that Konkin has already thought these things out. So like this is probably exactly how it's going to go down, and it might not be called the New Libertarian Alliance. It might be called something else. But if you look at like in Africa, a lot of these revolutionary groups in Africa, it's a very tribal sort of continent. So you'll have like the RUF and the DRC and like all these different like revolutionary groups. And I think that's sort of the sort of same tradition Konkin is using here. So we don't know what it'll be called, but it is very likely that there will be some sort of agorist entity that's sort of driving the direction here. And honestly, one of the things that I and myself and some other agorists have been working on recently has been the creation of a DAO, like a decentralized autonomous organization, to sort of further that goal a little bit. And we're in the super early planning stages, but it is something that we're working towards, because I think that I think we're towards phase 3. So we should have this sort of infrastructure in place already. It's just a matter of time. And I think that there's profit to be made, to be honest with you, for someone who does do it.
Yeah. I just do remember earlier, I think he kind of described New Libertarian Alliance, like when it says as more ambiguous or vague or just kind of a rough group of people, not this cemented thing where it's, I guess when you say New Libertarian Alliance, it just makes it seems so more formal in my head. Maybe it's just a taste thing, which I brought up before. I feel like sometimes he overly defines things or makes them overly mathematical, but maybe that's just the way my brain works.
There's a great book called Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, and it sort of like depicts something similar to like this sort of competing like anarchistic, like futuristic marketplace of ideas. And I think that's sort of something similar to what we're going to see. We might not have like one group of agorists leading the whole revolution, but it might be like the case where there's like 5 different groups of agorists all competing for, you know, your attention, for your membership, for your loyalty, or something like that. You know what I mean? So, but and at the end of the day, they'll be working towards the same goal. But Konkin is just using like the concept of the NLA is just meant to be like a sort of representation of agorism. I think that's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, I know especially the first reading when I read through this, it seemed way more formal and way more like. But yeah, that may just be a taste thing. Maybe it's
written in like a real like warlike fashion. Like this book is written in a very like let's go get them, like confront them head on kind of fashion. Like this is, as far as Konkin's concerned, this like the revolution gets bloody, and this is what it looks like, you know.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not done. Obviously, we're not done with this section yet. It's been a while since I've read through this again, but I know a lot of times Konkin gets this. What's the word I'm looking for? He gets the rap of being kind of like utopian or whatever, and especially when it comes to the phases, because people make it out like he laid out this specific thing, and the way he words it, you can kind of understand it, like, you know, just with that one paragraph, like New Libertarian Alliance, NLA. And then he's specifically calling it agorist things like, but then when you really take that back, step back, think about that, what that means, it can be far more ambiguous than the way it's sort of characterized in that paragraph. So also, I think that's where some people get put off, where like he has this like step-by-step, borderline in their head how it might be characterized, almost strict how this will happen. When you read it and if you think of it in a different scope, you can realize, okay, this is a little bit more ambiguous than you think it is. Like it's not like someone reading Revelations and giving you like a specific how things will go.
well, that's what I was gonna say. It's like they'll read the religious books with like a grain of salt, but like they won't give Konkin the same due.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. There's your kitty. All right. In this phase, the Agorist society is vulnerable to statist regression of the populace. Thus, the Agorists, whether visible or not, have a high incentive at least to maintain the present level of libertarian consciousness among the rest of the populace. This being done most expertly by the NLA. I phrase that word. One way to define who the NLA is at this phase. The NLA has its sustenance and its mission, but in addition to defending the Agorist society, it can work towards accelerating the next evolutionary step. All right, I kind of want to redigest that. Yeah. Maintain the present level of libertarian consciousness. So it sounds like he's kind of saying at this phase, we still need to be very mindful of kind of like what me and you are doing, or even what Dave Smith is doing in certain regards, or whatever. The message outside of things is, if that's, yeah.
And within the context of what Konkin's saying, those people who like the people who are doing these sorts of things that you're describing, they constitute this sort of agorist entity. Yeah. Which I think is important to remember, because we argue so often about like this section of the libertarian community versus that section of the libertarian community, but we're all fighting towards the same goal at the end of the day. We all want a free society. That might look a little bit different to me than it does to you, but generally speaking, there's a huge amount of overlap there, and I think that's what Konkin's talking about at this point. As we get further down, I think you'll see that it gets more specific. But
yes, which I guess maybe it might be why he phrased it as maintain present level of libertarian consciousness. Because one thing I think is important to note when you're reading any of Konkin's work is when he uses the term libertarian and when he uses the term agorist and the ways in which he says them, because they have almost different connotations depending on how he uses them. So, because he had just mentioned agorist, so it is kind of suspect. Why did he not just say agorist again? Whereas I guess the libertarian would have this connotation of being more ambiguous, more vague, just kind of you're kind of sort of soaking the ideas into the people without being as specific, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. I do think that Konkin, when he says maintain the present level of libertarian consciousness, I do think he's referring to like a consistent strain of libertarian that he wants us to maintain. That was really important to Konkin. You know what I mean? That was really the key. So I think like he doesn't. It's not enough to go out there and say like, go out and vote for your favorite candidate or something like that. I don't think to Konkin, like he was very radical. I don't think to him, I'm not sure he would consider that maintaining the present level of libertarian consciousness.
I guess I maybe I put too much meaning into when I see, because it is kind of weird how he interchanges the term agorist or libertarian in certain aspects. So to me, I was like, he had just used agorist earlier in this, so I was just like, in that very paragraph, so I was just like, why didn't you just reuse it again? But I assume there was kind of a connotation or something to be taken from that, but it could just be literally just a choice of word thing.
Yeah.
Just trying not to be redundant. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, because sometimes I do try to put meaning in that. And then you also do have to keep in mind sometimes where you see a capital L, because that obviously is a different meaning. So, for anyone following this if you're 5 parts into this and you're not someone super initiated into the libertarian world, there even subtle differentiations of whether it's capitalized or not means a whole hell of a difference. So
yeah, and I think like if you'll see, like I think he capitalizes
I think he's done
a bunch of important words that he wants to stress. I think he does that often. Counter economy and agora and stuff like that. Those are all capital words.
All right, cool. Let's see if there's anything else I want to break down on that. I think we kind of covered it. Yes, Junkie just said, I feel Konk is the kind of person who's very purposeful with his language. Yeah, I do too, but then sometimes it's like you might just be overdoing it. Because like I said, in that one, I'm just being kind of semantic. Because in that very same sentence at the beginning, you said agorist. I guess from a literary perspective, if you have, it would just be a matter of trying not to use the same word twice in a sentence. It's better just to mix it up a little bit. And they're kind of almost the same, in at least the way he uses it sometimes. So, all right, phase 3, high density, large condensation, agri society. In this phase, the state moves into a series of terminal crises, somewhat analogous to the well-known Marxist scenario, but with different causes.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt
go for
real
it.
quick?
Yeah.
Sorry.
As already get to go in that first sentence.
No. I'm just saying, as Jose's reading this, I want all the listeners to consider the state that our government is currently in. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's why I said the first sentence already. You're like, oh,
yeah,
it's like a boom bust cycle going nuts.
Right.
But with different causes, in this case, real ones. Fortunately, the potential for damage has been drastically reduced by the sapping of the state's resources and the corrosion of its authority by the growth of the countereconomy. The potential for damage. You know what? Yeah, even that last sentence is kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say entirely. Okay.
So
this is one of those things where the state I don't want to say statist, but maybe some of the people who are more apt for state power. I mean, I guess you could call them statists, but then some of them would even be our libertarian friends would make the argument that some of that was because of, and they use the same argument when it comes to like USSR type stuff. They'll be like, I'm not even a historical buff, so I'm not even really arguing it. It's kind of a chicken and the egg type thing. They'll be like, well, what about this political action that happened around the same time that led to X, Y, and Z? Like, you can't say it's all the counter economy. So I know, like, if you're putting this in modern terms, if we're applying this to modern terms, especially that last sentence, in some of the toothless manner of the state in some regards, in a certain sense, you can't count it all the counter economy, because obviously be someone out there who'll say, well, this political action, that political action led to this. And it's like, I mean, sure, okay, whatever. But there is definitely a case to be made. I normally make the case that even those political actions are in some ways influenced by the people who are not involved in politics, because they've just thrown it off completely. It's almost like the state struggling to be relevant still. So.
I mean, I would argue that like all of the good things have happened in spite of political action, not because of it. But when Konkin says the damage has been drastically reduced by the growth of the counter economy, like the damage of the state, think about how for any agorist out there, any crypto anarchist watching this, how much the damage of inflation has been drastically reduced in your life by cryptocurrency. Right? Think about how much the damage done by gun control has been drastically reduced by 3D printing. Think about how much the damage done by taxi cartels and hotel cartels has been reduced by Uber and Airbnb. And the list goes on and on and on, right? Think about all the people who can't get drugs and medicine that they need because of FDA regulations that buy them from the deep web. Agorism already is doing exactly what Konkin is describing here, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, and you really, it is like you do look at the modern scenario where we're like basically on the verge of war with Ukraine, and that was clearly like, I mean, I'm not saying not with Ukraine, but with Russia, but I'm not even saying it's entirely because of it, but there's definitely something to the fact that, we forgot about COVID now, and so it's like, I don't know, you put this in modern day terms and stuff, and then you brought up the potential for damage. It's like, just generically, having a more counter economic lifestyle insulates you against a lot of these issues. The inflation, gas prices going up. If you've kind of moved yourself along to having more of a, I don't know, entrepreneurial type thing, you can easily adjust. If you're a, quote unquote wage slave or whatever, which I still am to some extent, you have a specific location, you have a commute you have to go to. I mean, sure, I guess you could be an agorist still and have a commute or whatever, but you're going to be your own, working for yourself. So you're going to have more flexibility in what you do and what you like, shit like that.
Well, and that's the whole thing. Entrepreneurship insulates you from lockdowns and forced business closures and things like that. So the list goes on and on and on. In fact, every counter economic activity insulates you from some sort of statist aggression.
Yeah. All right. In fact, as the resources of the economy approach equality between the state and agora, the state is pushed into crisis. Wars and rampant inflation with depressions and crack-ups become perpetual as the state attempts to redeem its authority.
Hint, hint.
It may be possible to reverse its decline by corrupting the Agora with seductive anti-principles.
The Libertarian Party.
So the NLA's first task is clear: to maintain vigilance and purity of thought. In this phase, the NLA may no longer hold either label or much of its old form. Yeah, and that's another you did. Yeah, I mean, I know me and you have slightly different argumentation when it comes to the Libertarian Party. I mean, I more come from a pragmatic, but even in a pragmatic sense, I feel like that holds true. Because, like, yes, I can totally make the case that the Mises Caucus people of this one generally have, to some extent, the right idea. I think they're taking the wrong approach, obviously, but they have generally the right principles and such. And I know in their head, they're like, I just talked about this yesterday in Tower Power. We were talking about, like, if the state just, like, say with what's going on right now, if we just didn't get all fucky in our monetary policy, we'd be all right. And it's like, yeah, you're right. And this is like the dilemma of government. There is that, like, well, if we just went back to the Constitution, things would be so much better. And you're like, yeah, you're kind of right. But it's like, but we're not fucking gonna.
There's a reason why. There's a reason. And this is actually the topic of the book I'm working on. There's a reason why government always fails. Yeah. Right. And it's never worked. We've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. There's a reason why it never, ever works.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is that they're like, sure. It's kind of, I would apply that same thing to, like, the Libertarian Party. It's like, sure. Like, yes, if, let's say, theoretically, the Mises Caucus people reigned supreme, or whatever you want to call it, and they were able to do everything, perfectly navigate all the strategies or whatever for forever. Sure, maybe there's an argument to be made that there's some sort of case somewhat. I mean, it's still kind of iffy, but that's not gonna fucking happen. Just like we're not, like, the government's not gonna fucking, like, maintain, like, isn't gonna switch to a gold standard and fucking be like, you know what? Let's just lead a meager lifestyle. We'll rein back the regulation. We'll fucking
isn't this a much more realistic strategy? Doesn't this seem like a much more realistic goal than that we're going to convince everybody to become Rothbardian libertarians?
Yeah,
that's absurd. It's almost the only strategy that's more utopian than that are the secessionists who think that the state won't genocide them for leaving the Union.
Yeah, and the beauty about, like, agorism too, in especially putting in the context of, like, say, like, a Libertarian Party or whatever, is, like, the beauty of the praxis of agorism is it's not complicated. It's literally just entrepreneurialism. It's self-improvement, which then kind of expands out to the community, et cetera, et cetera. It is, in some regards, it's kind of complicated, but once you get a grasp, you're like, oh, this is pretty easy. And whereas something like Libertarian Party, or even say, let's say paleo shit, or even Hoppian strategy or whatever, it gets way more complicated. And the problem is, people are like, okay, well, if we just follow this guidelines, and you're like, okay, but the problem is the guideline doesn't start and end with you. You have to pass this torch on to someone else. And what are they going to do with this message you pass? You're going to do it exactly the way you intended it to them to? Whereas something like a simple praxis, like agorism, it's like, this is easy to keep passing the torch on and on and on. And so then people like Mises Caucus people or whatever, or Hopkins, or where they'll point to these short-term successes and be like, look at this. And you're like, okay, but we're giving you this perfect, maybe they won't have these flashy, and even then we actually kind of do, the agorists.
Yeah.
But like you don't generally have these flashy, like, well, look at this Ron Paul moment or whatever. But it's like, okay, but this is the slow, the steady. This is the to put it in Hoppian terms, this is the what's low time preference. Like, whereas you're blowing your wad with the high time preference with something like the Mises Caucus, and probably in 5 to 10 years it'll get passed off to the people that you stole it from in the first place. So, like,
I mean, and I think I made this point when we were talking with Dave, was just that no other political movement has had nearly as much success in such a small amount of time as the Agorists have had. Like, we've had the Silk Road, the Bitcoin white paper, the 3D printed gun, we've had the FGC9, we've had tokenized securities and assets and stocks and bonds and all sorts of stuff, and we're still going. We have privacy coins and ride sharing services, all sorts of Agorist entrepreneurial activities. So it's like it almost reminds me, like, when you were describing that, I was like, I think in memes, of course. So, like, you ever see that meme where, like, the top image is it's like the mental gymnastics meme, and the top meme, the guy's like doing crazy mental gymnastics, with the bottom line he just does like one or two tricks. It's like we're the Agorists from the bottom. Like we're the very simple, understandable strategy. Look, you just disregard the tyrants and do so in an entrepreneurial fashion. Boom, done. That's agorism. It's like, whereas the other factions are like, we gotta canvass the neighborhood and to convince people to be like Joe Jorgensen supporters and all this like lunatic crazy shit, or we're gonna secede from the union, and if they come and get us, we're gonna shoot and kill the army. Like, these people are batshit crazy. We're the only ones with like a logical, consistent way out of this, and unfortunately, I used to think we were making good progress. Sometimes I in the last year or so, I think it's been a little bit slower. But you know, I will get there one way or another, just by virtue of economic activity. It's inevitable.
Yeah, and I think there is something to the point that I know a lot of people say shit like, "Oh, well, you can do both," and it would like say that a lot of the energy that's going like the Mises Caucus route and shit, right? That I do think to some extent that kind of pulls away from him. Like, yeah, sure, you technically can do both, but you only have so many hours in your day or whatever, and it's like, I mean, okay,
I could chain smoke a pack. I could chain smoke 4 packs of Lucky Strikes and get chemo in the evening. It's the same thing as voting and engaging in agorism. It's like you're like taking 2 steps forward and 2 steps backwards.
I mean, it's obviously a little bit more nuanced than that, but there's something to it depending on how you frame that. But yes, all right, let's move on before we keep
getting sidetracked.
Yeah. In this phase, the NLA may no longer hold either label or much of its old form. The most motivated new libertarians will move into the research and development segments of the budding agorist protection and arbitration agencies, into positions as directors of the protection company syndicates. And that is like, I get what you're saying with we're kind of in phase 3, but we haven't quite gotten there.
That's what so. I'm sure you and the listeners are probably all familiar with Dale Brown from the Detroit Threat Management. This is a good example of what Conklin's talking about here, alternative protection agencies. Another one would be Cell 411 in Texas, where the Don't Comply crew, another one of those small enclaves of agorists that Conklin spoke about earlier, they came out with this app where rather than, if you, like, God forbid something happens and you need emergency help, rather than calling 911, you called like 411, I think it was, and it was like an app or something, and this alert would go out to other members of the network, and the community would respond rather than the police. So that's another alternative, but that's what Conklin is talking about here. And a third and final example would be that DAO that I was telling you, that we're thinking about creating this DAO to do exactly that, to sort of act as a sort of protection agency for other agorists. And one way that we intend on doing that is by providing bail relief and some other things. But that's what's happening today, and that's what Conklin is. That's one of the criteria he uses to describe phase 3. So that's one of the reasons why I think that we're there.
Yeah. The situation now approaches revolution, but is still reversible. Again, the new libertarians are on the forefront and maintaining and defending gains to this point, but are looking ahead to the next phase. The NLA, now just a collective term for the most forward-looking elements. Yeah, that kind of plays on a little bit of talking we were having earlier.
Right.
So can accelerate the process by discovering and developing the optimal methods of protection and defense, both by word and deed, for the industry, and by entrepreneuring its innovations. All right. At this phase transition between 3 and 4, we have the last unleashing of violence by the ruling class of state to suppress those elements that would bring them to justice for all past state crimes. The state's intellectuals perceive that its authority has failed and that all will be lost. Things must be reversed now or never. The NLA must prevent premature awareness of this status or premature action on this awareness. This is the final strategic goal of the NLA. When the state unleashes its final wave of suppression and is finally resisted, this is the definition of revolution. Once a realization has occurred, the state no longer can plunder and pay off its parasitical class. The enforcers will switch sides to those better able to pay them, and the state will rapidly implode into a series of pockets of statism in backward areas, if any. There's a lot there. I don't know if you have anything to add to it.
Well, yeah, for sure. A whole lot. I mean, think about where we are in terms of cryptocurrency and the U.S. dollar and the inflation. As the value of the dollar collapses even further, the state is going to lose its ability to pay off its enforcers. And those people are going to need to collect a paycheck. And who are they going to turn to? They're going to turn to the people who have sound money, the Agorists, right? So the ones who have Bitcoin and silver and gold and Bitcoin Cash and Monero, those are the ones who are going to be able to still transact after the state collapses. Yeah, I think that was basically all I had to say there.
Yeah, I definitely have something to add, but I think I'll add it after this next paragraph because it'll fit better there. Real quick though, Outlier Barber, he didn't super chat anything, but I'll bring it up anyways just because he said, do you have a time frame on when Legal Shield comes out with Agorist Nexus? If so, how much monthly? I don't even know what that is, but I figured I'd give you a chance to address it, if whatever that is. So
Legal Shield, if you're talking about the DAO, then we've got quite a ways to go. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. But yeah, you should probably ask Brandon. I've got so many balls in the air that I'm juggling at once, so many projects. It's honestly hard to keep up with.
Gotcha. All right. Phase 4, Agorist society with status impurities. The collapse of the state leaves only mopping up operations. Since the insurance and protection companies see no state to defend against, the syndicate of allied protectors collapses into competition, and the NLA, its support gone, dissolves. Statists apprehended pay restoration and, if they live long enough to discharge their debts, are reintegrated as productive entrepreneurs. Their training comes automatically as they work off their debt. We're home. New libertarianism is taken for granted as the basis of ordinary life, and we tackle the other problems facing mankind. All right, now this is the one I kind of want to address, because this is one I've heard a lot for critiques, and maybe this will come up again in the critiques. I have a feeling this probably won't come up to me. I don't know, maybe it will a little bit in this last chapter. But I know I get accused a lot of agorists of being, I kind of brought this up earlier, utopians. Thinking that we're going to collapse the state, and in some regards we do. But the people usually put it in the context of fantastical, that we're going to just have this and I can see how the misconception, and maybe this is actually even kind of sort of what Konkin did mean, that we're going to have this big grand hoorah agorist revolution and the state itself will collapse. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, likely, and I'm not even sure if he meant it specifically like that. Like, when you say a state, what do you mean? Do you mean all the state across the world? Do you mean one specific federal nation? Do you mean one state? Do you mean one section of a state? So it's I don't think it's going to be this clean thing that it's portrayed to be. I mean, I do think eventually, technically, probably maybe hundreds, thousands of years in the future, we will see a fully, agoristic libertarian world, whatever you want to call it. Maybe not technically fully, but to the point to where whatever statism is there is pretty marginal. But yeah, I do think it's still, even after reading that, I do think it's a little bit of a mischaracterization to portray it as if he is flat out saying that we're going to have this crazy, one, agorist revolution and then the state is dead. There's definitely some nuance to be had there. What do you mean by state? You know what I mean?
So I actually disagree. I think that's
so?
I think exactly what we're going for is a complete and total victory here. No compromise. Yeah. Our rival does not survive this match. The state dies at the end of this.
Yeah.
And I think that every agorist, the state is already defeated to the degree that they accept agorism in their own lives. So once you accept agorism, let's say you are 90% counter economist, 90% agorist, you are 90% free, right? So the state has already been defeated in your individual personal life. When we all come together and we all do that, or at least when a sufficient number of us come together and do that, the state collapses. It can't maintain under its own weight. It just falls and collapses. And that is sort of what Konkin saw. That's sort of what the whole agorist revolution is about. But one thing I wanted to go over here, which is sort of one thing that it's not related to what you were talking about, but he does bring it up here. And it's one of my favorite parts of agorism. It really is. And it's one of the things that drives most people nuts, which perhaps is why I love it so much. But he says, statists apprehended pay restoration, and if they live long enough to discharge their debts, are reintegrated as productive entrepreneurs. So think about what that means. Like, and he expands on this in an article that he wrote called "The Bread Is Mine Too," where the idea here is that there is no sort of like prison in an Agorist society. There is no sort of coercive punishment in an Agorist society, because if you think about it, the only rights we have are property rights. So all crimes can be fixed by returning property, by making the victim whole again. So yeah, exactly. So if you think about like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and stuff like that, these people have racked up incredible amounts of, they've really robbed an incredible amount of people. So the amount of money that they would have to pay back would be immense. So what do we do with people like this? They wind up in work-based restitution camps, labor camps, what the Hoppians like to refer to as the Agorist gulags, which is a term I think that we should embrace. I've often joked that one of my half jokes that one of my goals in life has been to ride around like the Django on top of his horse, like overseeing my farm of like politicians working off their debts to the American people, like Nancy and Chuck just doing like yard work, like farm work for me.
Yeah, but slavery is not immoral if they're not people. So,
right, exactly. They're politicians, people.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I mean, how else do you deal with a politician in a post-revolutionary society in a way that's consistent with the non-aggression principle? It's the only way is a restitution-based system.
Yeah, no, and I mean, when it comes to like criminal justice, it's like I get it. Like there is definitely that like urge of like we need some sort of like blood restitution or whatever. And I 100% get that. And I actually think there are definitely situations in which that's entirely appropriate. But you know, like usually even then those would be 99 times out of 100. I think the only times those are entirely appropriate really is if it's a situation in which, you know, you're only doing violence because it's called for in the moment. But now if you're past the moment and it's like, hey, this doesn't do anything other than just make me feel good in some weird twisted way, then it's like it generally doesn't do good. Like, yeah, you're like, if you start, you know, just killing politicians, it's like now you've kind of now what happens when you start killing politicians? Like, say you kill a Rand Paul or whatever, or
at that point you've become you've become the politician at that point, right? That's what happened with Robespierre. That's what happened with Cromwell. That's what happened when Washington invaded Pennsylvania. You know, at the end of the revolution, the guy holding the sword becomes the next tyrant, and that's sort of the whole issue. And in terms of like criminal justice, if I exact $50 worth of damage on you, right? If I don't know, if I somehow create some problem for you where you unjustly incur $50 worth of damages, you have the right to seek back $50 plus whatever interest I might have cost you and any sort of fees that you might have incurred in getting me to pay that money back. Anything past that is on your part is aggression, right? So one of the things as Agorist, one of the unique implications of Agorist punishment theory, one of the implications that falls out of all of this is that we reject punishment for the sake of deterrence, right? So you know, if I cost you $50 and $10 to it cost you to pay someone to get the money back from me, and maybe you could have made another $5 if you had that money, so I owe you a total of $65, let's say, and you say, hey, I want $100 to make sure you never do this again, then you at that point become the aggressor and I become the victim. And I think that's a pretty interesting part of all this.
Yeah. Kumo McMahon. I don't know why I had so much trouble with that name. He has a super chat. He says, off-topic question: do you feel that agorism may be losing out in cultural relevance to the other ideologies? I mean, real quick, I would say like maybe there's some truth to it, but I do think when it comes to like relevance or whatever, it ebbs and flows. So I mean, it's kind of really hard to like read the tea leaves based off the current situation. Like, I mean, you've been in this game longer than I have, Sal. I know it definitely was super hot when it was shit was super dire during the lockdowns when everyone was freaking out. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a similar time like that where more people come to that realization, or let's say the LPMC does have some sort of moment at some point to where their plans come crumbling down. I actually don't think they will. I think they'll do their whole takeover, and I think it'll just be a slowly subversion type thing where bad elements start seeping in there, and then the decent people start leaving, and it starts getting taken over by the shitheads again. But let's say something happens along the way, and some fulcrum point occurs, and there's a shift. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another resurgence of agorism or something at that point. So,
yeah, I think that the opposite, right? I think that we are gaining in cultural relevance, relative to the other ideologies. Think about and one of the key aspects of all this, and we know this from Hop, is that culture is sort of driven by monetary policy. And as agorists, we have the most sound money of everybody. So no, I don't think that at all. I think that as the state becomes more oppressive and more, they sort of prohibit more aspects of daily life, you're going to see more and more people migrate to agorism and to agorist solutions. Whether they know that's agorism or not is a different story, right?
Yes.
But they are going to be migrating to black and gray market solutions. It happens every time. Every time the state becomes oppressive. I've got a whole section on it in Anti-Politics in book 4. Every time the state becomes oppressive in some way, there's a sort of counter-economic response. The minute, I don't know who said it, it might have been Pete, somebody, your buddy, the moment that the state makes a law, there's a black market in response to it. So we can't lose. I really think agorism is inevitable in a certain way.
Yeah, you definitely hit on it there, because I was going to correct you and be like, I think you're kind of both right, but then whether they know it or not, because I get what he means in a certain sense of agorism and I guess you could almost call it capital A agorism or lowercase, agorism in the specific ideological, whatever you want to call it, sense. But then there is I get your main point was that even if you don't have that, that's still becoming more of a thing. It's just a matter of whether they realize it or not. And at the end of the day, I want people to realize it. That's the end goal. But at the end of the day, as long as they're engaging in the counter economy, that's my prime objective. The rest is just frosting on the cake. So
culture is a product of the market. It really is. When I was a kid growing up right in New York City, right outside New York City, if there was a movie or something, we were broke growing up. We couldn't afford shit. If there was a movie or some nice clothing that you wanted, we weren't going to go buy the name brand clothing item. We were going to go see the movie. We were going to go to Canal Street and buy it for the Chinese people for $2, compared to the $50 we would pay at the store. So there's always a response, no matter what the law is. There's always an agorist response to it. And at the end of the day, we always win. We always win. Look at the drug laws, right? Look at how mass noncompliance forced the state to sort of reverse itself and reverse the whole the prohibition of drugs and stuff like that. It wasn't some Libertarian Party candidate. Gary Johnson didn't get elected and change the marijuana laws. It was mass noncompliance that did that. Look at right now. The state's biggest threat is cryptocurrency. It's not the LP. It's not the Mises Caucus. It's not the paleo-libertarian movement. No, it's cryptocurrency. They're running regulations on 3D printing. Agorism is what scares them. If you want to know what scares the state, look to where they're concentrating their firepower, and it's not at any other ideology but us.
Yeah. I do want to touch on, because I did touch on the utopian-ish kind of question. I don't even know if utopian is the right way to. Someone said in here, and it kind of gets on what I'm getting at a little bit. He said, after the last 3 years, I don't know if or how a large portion of the global population would survive without the state telling them what to do. And I'm not saying that specifically. My point being, and this is something Popular Liberty talks on a lot, is that there's there is an incentive or whatever. There are people who do want that. I mean, maybe you will over time convince them that that's not really what they want, but in the immediate, that's what they think they want. And so that's my the idea of, the entire U.S. in one fell fucking motion collapsing under an agorist revolution, I think it's technically probably possible, but I do think we should. I mean, maybe we should, but at least I do. I typically try to reframe it for people like, okay, that's one thing that could happen, but it also could be like this area collapses and this other area fortifies more in statism, but then over time, our ideology seeps in and then allows them to collapse, et cetera, et cetera. It may not be this because a lot of people see this uniform thing that happens because this is a huge country. The idea that we would have a uniform level, and I do think there is definitely something, especially with like something like cryptocurrency, we could collapse it in some way, but it will probably in some places reestablish its footings of statism and such. So it won't be this clean, perfect thing. At least I don't think it will be. And I mean, it's possible it could be. I don't think it'll be this clean, perfect thing that some people seem to think it may be. Although, sure, maybe it could be. But I just think maybe a little bit more imagination is required as opposed to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't.
It's almost like a straw. It's almost like a straw man that I feel like people throw at agorists that like, oh, you're just going to collapse the state and da-di-da. Like, I think it might be a little bit more complicated than that.
Right. And obviously, Konkin is like putting this in like 60 some odd pages, right? So there's like obviously there's a lot more detail here, and of course, it's going to be more messy than that. No banking cartel is going to give up a monopoly on the issuance of currency peacefully. It's never going to happen. But I would just point out that regarding the comment that you're talking about, what Jeff said, after the last 2 years, I don't know if or how a large portion of the global population would survive without the state telling them what to do. I would just point out that a large portion of the global population hasn't survived because the state is telling them what to do. Look at how many people have died in the last 2 years taking their vaccine and
I agree.
Following their rules.
My point, though, was that even though they're wrong, that's still like how they're operating at the moment. And I think that will change over time, especially with market forces. But let's say some agorist revolution occurred right now. I do think there would still be people clamoring for their chains, and they would probably organize roughly in some sort of areas and probably have something akin to a state, or even, maintain, like, let's say there was some sort of crazy, I don't even know what, like a whatever, and let's say like New Hampshire or certain rural areas or some weird conglomerate of areas sort of became this stateless mushy thing, but then you have other areas like Cali that are super stateless still. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it'll be this clean, perfect thing that some people seem to think it might be. Like,
well, that's sort of where we are now today, right? Like, if you think about it, and I said this before, I might have said it on your show. Like, we already have enclaves of agorism developing all over the world, right? We have like the Miami Bitcoin community. We have the Free Staters, the Dash community in New Hampshire. We have the Don't Comply crew in Texas. I'd like to get a little community going here in the Tampa area. It's something that we should talk about one of these days. But there's agorists in Brazil and Portugal that I talk to, in Mexico, in Acapulco, all over the world. And like, that's what he's talking about, I think. And a little bit earlier in our reading today, that's what he was talking about. But by the way, I just want to say Paul Lewis hits the hits the nail on the head here. He says crypto can't be stopped. Currency is only the basis of an economy. You need the counter economy to provide entrepreneurs, and that's exactly what I think Konkin is talking about here.
Yeah, that's kind of my point too, with the point that, like, yes, let's say there's some sort of collapse of some sort, and like a state collapse, and let's say, the agorist, like, there are people clamoring for their chains, and they do group up in certain areas, but it's at the same point, we still have the market forces in our benefit. They may be able to hold on to some, vestiges of state, controlled ish, whatever. But at the end of the day, we will, over time, it may not be this clean, uniform thing that happens. We will over time win, just due to the way economics works, and the fact that, like, hey, you want goods, right? Well, we have fucking goods. So, like,
well, it's even more so than that. And like, the most appealing thing about agorism is the instantaneous liberation that it offers people. Once you accept agorism, once you understand that you are actually born free, and that there is just this mob of gangsters artificially oppressing you and stealing your freedom and taking it away from you, once you realize that, and you commit to a life of nonviolent civil disobedience, then you've already won. You've won at that point. You have effectively nullified the state in your life. Like Agorist, if you have become your own bank, you're not all the inflation bullshit. You're not worried about it because you're not paying it, right? If you make your own guns and you disregard gun laws, who gives a shit about that new ATF law about Glock triggers? Who cares, right? There's about auto sears. I got a 3D printer. I can do about 20 of those a day. Right? Who gives a shit what these people say? As once you realize that you are already free, that's the whole key about all of this, is that liberty is something that's like inherent within all of us. It's not some other politician can't give it to you because it was never his in the first place.
Yeah, I carry illegally all the time. I don't give a fuck.
Now you're gonna get stopped tomorrow. But
yeah, I mean, like, like, I get it. There's like a penalty, but it's like, okay, in my head, I'm like, well, what are the chances that it would ever fucking catch me? It's pretty fucking low. Like, yeah, I don't want to get caught, but it's also I'm too lazy.
I don't do anything illegal. I'm completely by the book.
Yeah, it's extrajudicial. Oh God, there was something you said there. Oh yeah, and that kind of plays to kind of bring up to the utopian point again. That was something I kind of wanted to work in there. The idea of that, like, well, it's a matter of like how free are you and how free are your surroundings. So like, let's say like because people always accuse them of having this like utopian idea of, we're gonna have this uniform, magical unipolar moment of the Agorist where everything just changes, and it's like, okay, maybe, but at the same time, like, it's kind of missing the forest for the trees. Like, at the end of the day, the biggest thing is that we want to get to a point to where you in your individual life at a point to where you are free, and everything extends outward from there. So now if you're in a situation where, everyone within 100 miles of you is roughly in a, 95+% agorist-ish type, economy or whatever, what does it really, I mean, yeah, in a certain sense it matters that someone in Italy is living under a government or whatever, but I mean, like, it's kind of an afterthought, and it's like, yeah, that's sad that they're living like that, but the end of the day, I'm free, and the people I care about are free, et cetera, et cetera. So, like,
and there's a great I included a piece here in Anti-Politics, chapter 16 by Per Byland, called "Saving the World Through Saving Yourself," and that's exactly what he's talking about here. Is that the whole concept of a lot of libertarians will tell you, well, I'm trying to convince everybody to be libertarian, or I want to like save other people and bring them into the movement. And what Per Byland says is, look, with a whole lot of luck, you got 70 to 80 years on this planet. Do you want to spend it trying to convince other people that they're being oppressed? Like, if you can't see the oppression as we're being forcibly injected, then there's nothing that I can do to convince you otherwise. I'm sorry. If you can't see the oppression at a 60% income tax rate, I can't help you. So rather than that, and this is also something that Thoreau brings up in Essay on Civil Disobedience. He says, like, we're only around for so long. I'm born in this world to live here, not to convince others to let me live. And I think that's really the sort of centerpiece of agorism, and that's a point that I try to stress in Anti-Politics.
Yeah, no, that is definitely important. There's some sort of like frame of mind to be had there. I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with trying to convince people, and I actually think there's to some extent commendable.
It's noble,
but there is,
yeah,
and there's some, but at the same point, there's something too, like, okay, maybe have a little more respect for yourself in a certain way. Like, live your life at least the way I see it. Everyone's different. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Live your life, and like the way I see it with, like, convincing others of liberty or whatever. I mean, obviously I have the show. I mean, this is more just for myself than anything. I like talking about these ideas.
Oh, it's
like, go ahead.
It's fine to educate people on all those things. That's completely fine. The key, though, is to understand that the only way to a free society is through free individuals. So you yourself have to be free if we want to create a free society, we have to be free as individuals, as people, before we can do that. And that's really the whole key. Yeah.
But the point I was more getting at is I think it's better off to live your life looking for those people more apt for those ones and kind of sort of roughly grouping up with them, whether that be through market actions, which is encouraged through our algorithm, or even, ideally even people who are friends, family, kind of slowly moving along those lines, because they're people that matter to you and you want them to be in your life. And so it's beneficial for you. It's beneficial for them. So this is a little bit of a Hoppian idea too, to some extent. A lot of people, it's kind of instead of trying to change other people, find those more apt to you and draw them in. And then you kind of, essentially start creating your own groups. And this is kind of market action, essentially. And, from there, it will kind of just naturally expand out anyways. This idea of educating others, you're kind of creating a group. Do you want to be part of this group? Do you want to, whatever, go ahead.
As agorists, when we interact with black and gray market entrepreneurs, right, a lot of times we're dealing with people who don't know or care about political philosophy. They could give two shits less. These people are just trying to they're just trying to provide for their family. It's one of the things Konkin tells us, and I think is important, is to go to these people and introduce them to the philosophy. And show them that, hey, look, what you're doing, there's a name to it. It's called agorism, right? What the philosophy that you're living by is called agorism. This is something that I do all of the time to people that I encounter every day. And I've turned so many people into agorists who have been living agorist lifestyles but haven't even realized it. And that has been one of the key ways that I've been able to convert people. And then those people, because they're entrepreneurs, right? They go out and they convert other people as well. So it really is like a sort of, it's like very contagious. Once it's the sort of thing that, humans are, the way our minds work, we can't reject something that's logically consistent. Right? When something's true, it's consistent. We as humans, the way our minds work, we have to accept it as rational thinkers. And agorism is exactly that same way.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's knock out this last chapter. We keep going on good. These are fun tangents, but I'm like, shit. I was worried this is going to be too short of an episode, and I'm like, shit, it's going to be a long
Sorry.
one. No, you're good. These are good tangents. Action or tactics, last chapter. It's a little bit shorter, so hopefully we can knock it out in a decent amount of time. The previous chapter discussed some tactics in passing. A few that have been found productive for radical libertarians and the MLL include infiltration of less radical groups and sparking splits by presenting alternatives. That was, we talked about earlier with the LP stuff. Essentially, that's kind of what you're getting at there, like just hanging out with the LP people, but doesn't mean you have to do all the other shit. Hell, you even advocated creating your own caucuses. But confrontation or coercion or deviation with visible day-to-day personal salesmanship among friends, libertarian social groups such as supper clubs to exchange information, goods, and support, and to act as a proto-agora, and of course, publication, public speaking, writing fiction with agorist messages, and educational activities in many forms. Teacher, business consultant, entertainer, revisionist economist, cat breeder, etc. Successful tactics can only be discovered and used and passed on. Those who perceive sufficiently similar conditions in time and place to those of another where a tactic worked can use it, but it is all a risk. That is what activism is, a type of entrepreneurship, of guessing the market and supplying the demand. One can become better and better at making good guesses. That's what makes a successful entrepreneur. It's all in human action by von Mises, if you can apply it. To find out what has been tried and worked or failed, communication is necessary. If you have reached this page and agreed and have a desire to support resistance or a burning need to resist coercion, you are ready for the MLL or NLA in existence, depending on the phase we are currently in. Free yourself, get active. You have anything to add to that before we get into this? And it kind of starts getting into what phase we're in. But
so the MLL, for anybody out there watching, listening, who's wondering, the MLL is the Movement for the Libertarian Left, which was a sort of movement that Konkin created. Had a publication by the same name, but not much more other than that is really known about it. But the only other thing I would add here is, in the first paragraph, Konkin just sort of gives you a list of different ways you can engage in agorism. So if you're out there wondering, how can I do this? Pick one, right? Teacher, business consultant, entertainer, revisionist historian, agorist, economist, fiction writing, organize a supper club, a social group, exchange information, goods, and support, so on and so forth. So like, there's no like a lot of times one of the criticisms that we get and that Rothbard gives later on is that, this is who's going to engage in all these black market activities? This isn't for the family man, right? How can you expect the average American to do this? Look at all the different ways the average American can engage with counter economy that Konkin just listed.
Yeah, we've gone ad nauseum about this. I know I've used the example I think a few times in this series already of you could literally be a CEO of some corporation and you could still engage in agorism. You're just bending the rules in whatever way you can. And obviously there are aspects of your life that aren't very agoristic, just like there are aspects of mine that aren't. There are aspects of probably most agorists that aren't. I mean, hell, even you being, I know absolutely. You're one of the prime. I'm sure you still engage in sometimes in activities. You're like, well, maybe this other activity would be preferable and more agoristic in some extent. That could even be something as simple as, well, there's a little fucking mom and pop shop that clearly probably doesn't, submit all their taxes information or report it, or Walmart. And you know what? Sometimes that convenience, you go to Walmart. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. I mean, sometimes you're weighing the pros and cons. But, if you're in a position, you're like, I have a little extra time to go, I'll drive 2 minutes down the road and go to the little, little farmer's market or whatever and get that instead. There's always something. It's literally just it's a mentality of like, what is more, what is more preferable in that aspect? It's just being more mindful.
We all engage the agora to the degree that we're able to. Yeah. Right. And that includes like risk assessment and financial capabilities and everything else too.
Yeah. And even as petty as that example I just gave between going to the farmer's market or going to Walmart, you know what? Like even the most truest of agorists, like sometimes you got shit to do. That sounds ridiculous, but it's completely valid. Sometimes the 20-minute cost value is enough to where it's like, in my given example, maybe I'm doing a million other agorist things. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, this give an example. It's not ideal.
You have to prioritize, right? Yeah. You have to prioritize and do what you can. You have to do the most that you can with what you have. Not everyone is going to be able to live. I don't know if anyone can live 100% as an agorist. I don't even think Konkin lived. Yeah. From what I understand, he was very agorist, but I don't know if he was 100%. I can't imagine how anyone could live.
I don't even think it'd be healthy to live that way, really. Like, like in a certain sense, and that's and I guess in a way that's almost kind of missing the point, because the idea is to, I mean, to some extent, it is like,
I think I've got a good. I'm about 80% there, but that's that final 20% that you just can't avoid it. Yeah, like some of us, it depends what your specific circumstances are, but you might need to get a driver's license. You might need to register your car. You might need, who knows? It depends on what you do and how you live your life and stuff like that. But if it's important to structure your life in a way that you can take on the greatest degree of risk possible. If you're 40 years old, you got a wife and 2 kids, you have obligations, you got a mortgage you got to pay. You probably can't engage in the same level of risk that a 17-year-old who's going to get charged as a juvenile can take on. And that's just the way life goes, right? But you still do what you can to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and your life matters far more than some agoristic virtue signaling. So, like, a lot of people, you don't need to bend over backwards. This is the whole point. Like, if it is, and I think it's a mindset thing where you have to realize, you're not doing this for virtue signaling. You're doing this because it actually will make your life better, your personal life, and it will expand outward. So, like, even that example of the farmer's market, if you have 20 extra minutes, I think in the long run, it's actually better to support those type of industries. It's better because less of that money goes to the thing. It's better because you're getting a better product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there are obviously, sometimes where it's like, it's more convenient to go Walmart, whatever.
Palou says homesteaders still go to the store. He's absolutely right. I know Shudra out in Australia grows all kinds of stuff. And I think he still has to, there's still a few things he can't grow, so he has to go to the store and buy. And that's just the way it goes.
Yeah. And that's the kind of point I'm getting at is, and Kumo just said, when the strength of agorism, any step is a step in the right
Yeah,
direction. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, like,
any way that you can remove the state's influence in your life is a huge victory. That's enormous, right? If you can become your own bank and you can stop paying the inflation tax, you can stop paying for the child genocide in Yemen, that is enormous. I don't care who you are. Like, the way I look at it, that is like a dramatic victory, right? If you could do something like that, that's not even like a small step. That's a huge step. If you could negate the ATF's influence in your life, or the Federal Reserve's influence in your life, or the SEC's influence in your life, or the police, whatever, if you can stop these agencies from affecting your life, that is an enormous victory. It's much more than any other faction of the libertarian movement can claim to have achieved.
Yeah, but in the end, if you don't drill that third hole, do you really love liberty? Just kidding.
No comment.
Don't do that. What phase are we in? In October 1980, first edition, most of the planet Earth is in phase 0. The British Isles, Australia, and Canada have moved substantially towards phase 1. North America is in phase 1. Only in the highest concentrations today in Southern California are the first signs of phase 2. Okay, maybe there's something to that, but that makes me giggle. I mean, I guess the spots where they crack down.
You have to remember, though, at the time, though. So at the time, Bob LaFave, so Rothbard had this whole like anarchist meetup at his place in New York, like Walter Block and Roger Garrison, and just absolute legends. At the same time, over on the West Coast in LA, Bob LaFave was doing the exact same thing with Sam Konkin, Victor Koman, Daniel Schulman, and all these other legendary agorists or legendary anarchists who were proto-agorists. And that's what he's talking about here when he says Southern California, because like the LaFave group had a sort of agorist tendency, whereas the East Coast libertarians, the Rothbardians, were more engaged in the political arena.
That makes sense. Yeah. Assuming the situation is not reversed, the first few droplets of actual agorist societies, anarcho-villages, are nucleating a viable sub-society.
And by the way, I had Victor Koman on the Agora a while back to talk about the anarcho-village, where him and Konkin and Daniel Schulman and a bunch of other agorists lived for years, and it was like the base of the agorist community for a while in California back in the day.
Nice. The movement of the libertarian left exists only in California, with a few scattered nuclei, agents and cells in alliance. The new Libertarian Alliance, previously proclaimed, was found premature, and NLA remains an embryo or nucleus until objective conditions arrive to sustain it. The MLL has its work cut out for it. Externally, the worldwide collapse of the left has weakened. Left in quotations. Has weakened restraints on the competitive segments of the state who are rushing towards war to remystify their restive victims with patriotism. There's something there. It's pretty convenient after 2+ years of fucking us with COVID. Now, war stuff. Seizing the abandoned leadership of the anti-imperialism, anti-war, and anti-conscription movement with a fresh, invigorating ideological backing has become an opportunity for libertarians to become the left. MLL has to compete with partyarch and monocentrist elements for this preeminence. I do want to reiterate, and we do this almost every time, when he says left, he's not literally meaning like liberals or Democrats or even left libertarians in the modern sense of the word. He's more meaning, we've been over this
in the classical sense,
yeah. So, the lurching of American plutocracy from the brink of runaway inflation to depression and back again, and even how they're swinging large numbers of complacent businessmen and raise their consciousness beyond conservative assurances of restoring stability to consider radical and even revolutionary alternatives. Only the libertarian left can steer these entrepreneurs toward an ideological, non-pragmatic position. Therein lie our opportunities. Internally, the Libertarian Party has reached a crisis with the 1980 American presidential election. The premature unmasking of the statism inherent in partyarchy by Crane Clark's blatant opportunism has managed to generate not only left opposition, but right and center opposition. I'm not as aware with this bit of history. I'm not sure if you are. Major defections mount daily. I don't know if you know much with that one. I mean, I'm sure you could. It sounds like something you could easily put in modern context with a I don't know, Bill Weld or a fucking or even to some extent JoJo or whatever the hell, to where they jump the shark so much that everyone's kind of like, ooh.
I think that this is just sort of like the politics of the day that Konkin is sort of berating.
Yeah, which I mean you can history rhymes. So there's something to that.
Exactly. Yeah. Konkin says the Libertarian Party is in a crisis. When is the Libertarian Party not in a crisis? When have they not been in a crisis? They're always in a crisis. Whether it's Gary Johnson doesn't know where Aleppo is, or it's just bake the cake, or Joe Jorgensen is joining Black Lives Matter, or the Mises Caucus is upsetting everybody. Like, there's always crisis in these political movements, and that's because they are political in nature, of course.
Yeah. The failure of reformist elements to oust the coctopus by the Denver Convention and lull the unradicalized back in line would set the USLP back dramatically and generate thousands of disillusioned recruits for the MLL and anti-party educational and counter-economic activities. With this manifesto, go ahead. You want to say?
This is something that I still try to do, right? So as people get frustrated with the party, it's our job as agorists to say, hey, look, we have an alternative solution where you don't have to deal with this bullshit. There's no more infighting, right? In politics, it's based on competition and adversarial sort of fighting. In the market, it's based on cooperation and like mutually beneficial exchange.
Yes.
So like when we see these people who are disillusioned with the party, let's extend an olive branch to them and try to draw them into the fold.
Yeah, there's a good point to that, because I do frequently talk. I mean, obviously I have a political philosophy type podcast, so sometimes I will get in these conversations about political strategy, and it is funny, people tease me because I'm like an agorist. I'm like, I can still put my like political strategy hat on. This isn't me saying this is the best idea. So like you bring up
I can point out how shitty of a job you guys are doing without even believing in your mission.
Yeah, and the kind of like point, like to put in the context of the Mises Caucus. If anything, if I'm going to put on my political strategy hat, one of my biggest critiques, if anything, is they don't go hard enough in the takeover language, in the we are taking this political entity over with our given philosophy or whatever, because that leaves the door open. The more room you leave open in a political sense for subversion, and it's going to happen eventually no matter what, because that's just how the incentives work. Right, but this allows for other elements, which we already kind of saw with the Rod Strep thing, with kind of a liberal, whatever the fuck, kind of getting in there. Which, I mean, I know there are arguments to be like, well, it's a minor position. You're like, okay, but you're opening the door, you're letting it in.
Just wait.
and that's, if anything, I don't go hard enough. But the beauty of something like agorism is we don't have that fucking problem, because it's like we don't have to take this thing of agorism and be like, wall it off and keep it perfectly hermetically sound. I mean, in a certain sense you kind of do, but it's mostly entrepreneurialism. So it's like, yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, you're going to pick and choose who you're going to want to do business with, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some aspect of that, but it's far more open and way more decentralized or whatever. Whereas something like a central entity, there are certain there is this, and that's one of the biggest criticisms the non-LPMC people will give them shit for, is the takeover language. And it's like, yeah, well, that's in a political sense, that's what they're fucking supposed to do. And them giving any ground to you whatsoever in a political sense is them opening the door for you to re-enter into it. So,
but notice how in agorism there's none of that. There's no like, it's not like I'm going to take you over, Jose. There's none of that bullshit. There's none of that. It's like, I need to work with you. We both have a goal in mind, and it's in both of our interests to see each other succeed. That's the way it should work, right? That's the way, like when Tolstoy spoke about love, and this is why we are classical leftists as agorists, because Tolstoy and like that whole tradition, but like When Tolstoy spoke about love, this is what he was talking about. He was talking about how the market functions, right? How the market is sort of mutually beneficial to all parties involved. That's what agorism is involved. That's what it means, and that's what I think that's one of the biggest strengths to it. One of the biggest differences between agorism and other forms of libertarianism is that we are able to sort of maintain that sort of, I don't want to say it sound like a sort of hippie, but like that sort of like brotherly love sort of aspect. Like that really is important, I think. And you don't find that in politics.
Yeah, and there is definitely some sort of, there's almost like a market mechanism in our inherent in the philosophy or whatever you want to call agorism, as opposed to something like political activism or whatever. Because like I brought up an example before, you do have to kind of wall it off. Like it doesn't act under the same, within like something like agorism or entrepreneurialism, the shitty ones kind of get weeded out in a certain sense. Whereas it requires more central action, which I basically just described, from something like a political entity. It requires something like that to be like, no, to like wall off, philosophically. And the example I use of the LPMC or whatever. Whereas something like an agorism, it's so decentralized, so market forces, it just kind of, it's the unseen hand. It does it on its own.
Exactly. Like if you look at me, if you start a business like a 3D printer company and accept cryptocurrency, you assume that there's a demand there. You're taking a risk, but if you're right, and there really is a demand for people to acquire 3D printers without having to access KYC payment platforms, you can make money and you can benefit financially. And that is the whole key. That is the key to agorism. It's finding ways to profit that disrupt the state. That's what it's about. And that's the only way we're going to get to a free society. Yeah. It's the only way the individual is going to free themselves. It's the only way we as a society, if that even exists, if you even think that's a real thing, I'm not even sure it is. So don't DM me. But if you do accept society as real, that's the only way to get to a free society.
Yeah, and you said like agorism is essentially entrepreneurialism while trying to disrupt the state. I would even add that last little qualifier, while trying to disrupt the state, and I think we've had conversations with it. I actually think in a certain sense it's essential, but if you really start to think in a longer scope and in a different way, you realize it's almost redundant. Because if you drop that line, it's literally just a low time preference look at entrepreneurialism, because that by not operating within the state to the extent that you can, you do insulate yourself from further aggressions of the state in the future. And it creates a market effect where it allows other people to engage as well. And, it's kind of this multiplier effect where, this is the thing that is best for you, is what I'm saying. Like, it's just that you have to, expand your thinking past just this one transaction. And if you expand it, like, yes, maybe it'll take a little bit of pain if I'm, evading taxes or whatever the hell you want to do in the specific thing that makes it more agoristic. And this is where the cost benefit analysis comes in. But you also got to think, what are the long-term benefits I get out of this? And you can even look at it in a purely individualistic, selfish, whatever manner, and it still comes out working the same way, in my opinion. So
yeah, look, all entrepreneurship is disruptive.
Yes.
In a very important way. Entrepreneurs aren't. And this is one of the things that Dave, we spoke about with Dave, whereas like wage slaves, wage workers are slaves because they have a portion of their proceeds automatically deducted from their earnings, whereas entrepreneurs don't have that. So entrepreneurship is in and of itself. Also, entrepreneurs are better positioned to minimize their tax burden, not only for themselves, but also for their employees. So there's all those ways that entrepreneurship is on its own is more consistent with an agorist philosophy. But entrepreneurship in black and gray markets, you sort of have a multiplier effect. And I think that sort of is what you're saying. That's also what Konkin is saying. That's what a lot of us are saying in agorism.
Yeah, but to bring up your point again with the last bit being the extra little caveat of like to disrupt the state, I do think it is important in a certain sense, but only in the sense of not everyone thinks that way. And once you start thinking that way, you realize that is redundant. But the idea, initially, people don't recognize the redundancy. So it is important to instill that initially. All right, with this manifesto as manual and inspiration, is manual inspiration. New libertarian strategists and tacticians can research, develop, correct, and enact the new libertarian strategy and the tactics appropriate to the conditions met. Much work is needed, but the projects have consequences no mundane work can provide. An end to politics, to taxation, to conscription, to economic catastrophe, to involuntary poverty, and to the mass murder of warfare in the final war society against our enemy, the state. Counter-economics provides immediate gratification for those who abandon statist restraint. Libertarianism rewards the practitioner who follows it with more self-liberation and personal fulfillment than any alternative yet conceived. But only new libertarianism offers reformation of society into a moral working way of life without changing the nature of man. Utopias may be discarded. At last, we have a global society to fit man rather than man to fit some society. What more rewarding challenge could be offered? Have you anything to add at this point? Otherwise, we're almost there.
No, but that's what we were saying earlier. How it creates a free society by creating free individuals first.
Yes, I will say without changing the nature of man is actually kind of important. That was something I think I touched on a little bit earlier, where when it comes to just political strategy or practice in general, is because a lot of these political strategies, whatever the given thing is like, okay, well, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do this, and we'll do this. And and in some of those things you can kind of recognize, well, like, okay, well, those are a little bit like, I guess maybe in a way, maybe it's overly simplistic, but it's like changing the nature of man. And especially now if you're talking about some sort of thing that's going to go multiple generations or be some sort of team effort amongst multiple people, like, sure, like you can say like, okay, but we're doing this to gain this. Right. You're like, but what effect does this have on a larger populace and how they think on the appropriateness of the action?
Right. So it's like again, going back to what we were saying earlier, like you're not going to change the nature of man. You're not going to convince the majority of voters to become Rothbardian ANCAPs. But you can convince them to act within their own economic interests, right? And that's what we as Agorists are doing, which is a lot more feasible, I think, to any rational person.
Yep. Should you now have chosen the new libertarian path, you may wish to join us in our AAA oath and battle cry, or something similar, or renew yourself with it regularly. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little cheesy, but we witness to the efficacy of freedom and exult in the intricate beauty of complex voluntary exchange. We demand the right of every ego to maximize its value within limit, save that of another ego. We proclaim the age of the market unbound, the natural and proper condition for humanity, wealth in abundance, goals without end or limit, and self-determined meaning for all. Agora. We challenge all who would bind us to show cause. Failing proof of aggression, we shatter our fetters. We bring justice all who have aggressed against any ever. We restore all who have suffered oppression to their rightful condition, and we destroy forever the monster of the ages, the pseudo-legitimized monopoly of coercion from our minds and from our society, the protector of aggressors and thwarter of justice. That is, we smash the state, anarchy. We exert our wills to our personal limits, restrained only by consistent morality. We struggle against anti-principles that would sap our wills and combat all who physically challenge us. We rest not nor waste resource against the state until the state is smashed and humanity has reached its agorist home. Burning with unflagging desire for justice now and liberty forever, we win action. Agora, anarchy, action. And yeah, this was written in 1980 by Samuel Rokkonkin. And that is the end of NLM. We do have the critiques after. I will say that last bit is a little bit cheesy because it reminds me of like a Pledge of Allegiance or something. But I maybe it is just a matter it was written in 1980. And like I feel like even now, maybe it's kind of hard to put myself in the frame of a normie. But I'd say even some normies I talk to don't have this, like even me as a kid, like I remember like this feeling you get from like the pledge or the flag or shit like that. And I feel like to some extent, some of that's been sapped out of even your everyday man. Like there is still a little bit of that reminiscent, but it's just not the same.
It's almost like now I'm going to think back to like catechism school, but like in CCD we were taught like the Apostles' Creed or something like that, and it's just sort of a statement of belief, right? A statement of principles that sort of summarize your ideology, your belief system. I think that's all that this is here. But the whole Agora anarchy action thing has actually the AAA oath that's actually been relatively successful because it's so simple and repeatable that it's sort of become well known. That's why you have the little A with the A cubed, like the anarchy A with the cubed symbol. That's why we as Agorist have adopted that, because of that triple A oath right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you have anything on the last little bit, but we're at an hour and a half. We're kind of perfect amount of time.
Yeah.
We'll move into the critiques in the next one. The first one is starts right off hard with Rothbard, so that'll be fun. If I remember correctly, I'm not gonna look through it right now, but I'm pretty sure there's a few back and forth. So that one will probably be a couple parts, 2 or 3 parts, just covering that one. Oh, thanks for the $2, Poyu. I appreciate you always showing up here. You always have good insights in the live chat. More episodes about Voltaire and Declare. Yeah, dude, if you guys haven't checked out that one, it's already out now with Tommy. I love Tommy, but he's obviously not as big a guest as some of my other Anarchist Handbook episode guests. So, yeah, like definitely go check that one out. I mean, while he's not as big of a name, I actually think that was one of my favorite episodes, and it was really good. Voltaire and Declare is a very interesting thinker of her time.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, I may do more Voltaire episodes in the future. I'm definitely more focused on trying to do Anarchist Handbook. So if any of you guys know like good lefties out there, let me know, because that's been the hardest thing for me to find is good people to cover, like Bakunin, Kropotkin, people like that, because it's like
Ben Burgess.
But he's not even an anarchist, so like it would be.
He's a state socialist.
Yeah, which I mean, I get it. Like a lot of people
would say, like Lenin or something.
Yeah, I know a lot of people would say like, oh, some of those people aren't even really anarchists. I'm like, okay, sure, maybe technically, in some sense, depending on how you're, defining things. But even people like Kropotkin, I wish I could get Shu on to read Bakunin. Yeah, I wish I could.
Vaush.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess Vaush says he's an anarchist. I don't know enough about him. I'll be honest. I don't know much about him. I've never seen anything that's impressed me by him. Which I mean, I guess you can say that by. And
there's nothing.
It's so. I guess maybe
he calls himself a Biden libertarian or some shit like that.
And like maybe I'm asking for maybe I'm asking for too much, but like to some extent, like I'm also kind of trying to get an aesthetic for every one of these episodes, and so like. And I want to have a certain vibe with the guests I have. Like I don't want to have someone on that I hate. Like and not even that I like hate Vaush, but it's like I just don't see any, like, even though I know we've never met, I don't even see any sort of like instinctual rapport that I feel like I could have with him. There's nothing. I've never heard him say anything interesting. I don't care to hear his insights on anarchist theory.
It's almost like there aren't that many intellectual commies out there.
Huh. I know it's almost insurmountable. I'm gonna have a hard time trying to get somebody. I don't fucking know. Like, I mean, I'll make it happen one or another. Ideally, I want to
looking for a literate commie.
And I'm gonna. And so for those like out here, I mean, it's very well known. I'm Agorist, ANCAP, whatever you want to call me. Like, but I fully intend when I do those episodes. The Bakunin one might be the hardest one. Maybe it was Kropotkin. I mix up the two. One of those two might be actually the hardest one to do. I don't intend on making an argumentation like episode. I'm literally going to try to steelman it the best I can and try to find some place where we can kind of meet. And I don't intend on pushing back, because the point of this series is to steelman every one of these ideas, and that's why I'm intentionally trying to find guests who actually have these kind of sort of ascribed to their thought process or whatever, and that way I can accurately represent them to the best I can. I mean, there is obviously going to be a bias. It's going to be really fucking hard for me to talk to like a full through and through like fucking commie and to be like anarchist commie and be like, yeah, okay.
Like I said, good luck finding one that knows how to use a computer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think they're out there. It'll be difficult. Derek Bros. Someone did Derek Bros. I don't even know who he would cover. I mean, I'd definitely be open for Derek Bros.
He's not a commie.
No, he's not a commie either. Well, the thing is, too, a lot of those ones, I can't remember which one is Bakunin or Kropotkin. Only one of those was really hard for me to read as an ANCAP. Like some of those, like say like Prude Hahn, who's more of a mutualist, his was actually really good. Like his essay didn't really even go into like economic theory or anything.
Because he's older. It's because Pardun is older. Kropotkin is a little bit more of a real commie. The whole he's got some wacky ideas, but Bakunin himself I thought Malice gave him way too much credit. Bakunin was a nut, and I don't know.
I don't remember which one of them. There was only one of them. It was either Kropotkin or Bakunin. I can't remember which one that I was just like, I just can't stand this essay. But then the other one, like obviously I brought Proudhon. His was more about like the idea of how like the revolution of the mind or whatever, or like, the rising of class consciousness or whatever. There's something to be extracted from that even as an ANCAP. And then I wish I could remember which one was Bakunin or Kropotkin, but there's another one where there was some definitely stuff that I could pull out of there that I could have some good conversation about and actually agree with. But there was one of those I was like, man, whenever I get this essay, this one's gonna be fucking hard.
Kropotkin was at least Bakunin was very smart, but Kropotkin was more insightful.
Yeah, maybe it was Kropotkin. I don't know. I wish I could remember which one. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll get to them all eventually. I don't know. We'll figure out who I get. Brianna Coyle for Kropotkin. That's funny. Yeah, I don't know. We're open. I mean, shit. I don't even have you. I mean, I don't know if. I mean, maybe I can show you the ones that are left over because I have other ones besides lefties. I don't know if there's one that like you like agree with. There are definitely a couple more ANCAP type ones. I was thinking about getting maybe Michael Humer for the one. Because there's one that like basically the whole essay, the point of it is fucking social contract theory, which is like the go-to is obviously humor. So,
yeah.
So all right, well I guess we're at a good spot here. We're just kind of shooting the shit now. If you want to drop whatever your plugs are, and then next time we'll hit on critiques whenever we get on again.
The book is Anti-Politics. Check it out. It's on Amazon. If you want to pay with crypto, you can DM me and we'll work it out on the side. Agora Threads for agorathreads.com for Libertarian Agorist apparel. 3D Printer Go Burr for 3D printers and 3D printing supplies without having to access KYC payment platform. Other than that, follow me on social media at Sally Mayweather or Sal the Agorist.
All right, and this is No Way Jose. You can find me on YouTube, all the major audio podcatchers. I'm on Odyssey as well. At 2020 No Way Jose is my Twitter handle. I'm also on Getter, but I don't ever fucking use it. I'm on Facebook as well and MeWe, but really Twitter's the only place I use shit. If you want to give me money, patreon.com, just No Way Jose 2020. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Someone's saying anti-politics is greater than Erica's Handbook. Well, you know what? If you guys agree with that, help me finish my Erica's Handbook series so I can finally fucking get on to anti-politics, and maybe I'll start a series on that. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe let's do all Sal. Because the whole having to like tailor guests to everyone has been a bit.
Yeah, I hear that.
But I think it'll make for a good product in the end, especially with the Erica's Handbook and the very eclectic group of people in the Erica's Handbook. So it'll make it good. Yeah, so I'll get to it eventually. I'm probably the person who's read the most of the Erica's Handbook of anyone who's bought it by the time I'm done with it. Because every one of these essays, like I'll read it multiple times for each episode. So because if you guys haven't picked up, I'm not the smartest, so so it takes multiple times for me to be able to like keep up with someone who is really well versed on these people. So, but yeah, with that I am out, and I appreciate everyone who showed up, and thanks again, Sal. Stick around, we'll talk about scheduling for the next one.
You got it.